So hi, everybody. Welcome to today's edition of the Spectral Geometry in the Cloud seminar. Today, we're having Yves Conen-Verdière, who will speak about attractors for force internal or inertial waves. So Yves, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. It's work with Laure Saint-Raymond. Okay, I will discuss two types of waves: internal wave, which people are doing some very nice experiments, and inertial waves, which are easier to describe. I mean, the equations are much simpler, but at the end, it's very similar. I start with internal waves, waves which are inside the medium, and you start with a fluid which is stratified by the density or by the temperature or by the salinity. So you have some horizontal stratification, which is stable. It means that you have some equation between the gravity, the density, and you start to force this medium by some external forcing. In physics, forcing is very important. For example, the tides are forced waves by the attraction of the moon and the sun. So it's maybe more important in physics than spectral theory. It's related, of course, but it's a typical thing in physics to have a forcing. You have a forcing, and the forcing will slightly deform the stratification and create some oscillation of the stratification. And you can, this oscillation creates some wave which propagate, and they propagate transversally to the stratification, but not with right angle, with some angle which depend on the frequency of the forcing. And I will show you some experiments. There are several groups of physicists, a group of Leo Mas, and there is a group which I know better, which is a team of Thierry d'Auxois in Lyon, and especially a student, Christophe Brouzet. And they show experimentally that the waves, they concentrate on some closed curves, which are kinds of attractor of the. It's not like quasimodes or things like that, which are close to the periodic geodesic, because here they are really concentrate, they are closer and closer to the. It seems to contradict the Hamiltonian properties, but as we will see, it doesn't. Some few mathematical works, for quite old work by Ralston, and more recent work by Dyatlov-Zworsky and collaborators, where they found some different method in order to prove a very similar result to ours. So the experimental setup is very simple. You have an aquarium, which is like that, which is filled, well, it's two-dimensional. So you see, it's very thin and okay. And you put some salt water, a lot of salt and less salt. So you have an horizontal stratification. And then you can adjust the lateral wall with some angle alpha. You have a parameter alpha. Okay, you don't keep the rectangular, because if it's rectangular, you can separate variable. You get Fourier analysis and you see nothing, no attractors. You choose some angles and you make a forcing at the other boundary of the domain of frequency omega 0. Okay, and now you have some small markers inside the fluid so that you can see the velocity of the fluid. And what you see very nice pictures like that, which are kind of closed trajectories. I don't know exactly, but and it's very stable. If you change a little the frequency, or if you change a little the angle, you still get some attractor. What we wanted to do or more precisely, what Laure Saint-Raymond wanted to do is to have a mathematical model in order to explain what kind of mathematics is behind these attractors. And I will show that we have developed a very simple mathematical model for which we can really see some proof the existence of some attractor for the corresponding wave equation. So inertial wave is much simpler. You have a fluid which is a rotating fluid. So it's very common in the stars or everywhere. You have some rotation, okay? And you look at the Navier-Stokes equation, a simplified version, which you assume the viscosity vanishes, and you take a linear approximation where the speed is, the velocity is small. And you get this kind of equation. So U is the velocity, it's a vector value of the function, depending on the time. Omega is the rotation. So U dot plus omega wedge U is equal to minus the gradient of the pressure plus the forcing term, which is f of t, which is a periodic function. Okay, and you assume moreover that the fluid is incompressible, means that the divergence of the vector field vanishes. And in order to remove the pressure, you project. It's called the Leray projector because I guess it was introduced by Jean Leray. It's an orthogonal projection from all vector fields onto the vector fields which are divergence free. And for differential geometers, you can identify vector fields with differential forms of degree d-1, d is the dimension. The projector is simply d star plus -1. So you see that it's a pseudo-differential operator because you know that the inverse of the Laplace operator is a pseudo-differential operator, and here you have a differential operator. Okay, so it's a pseudo-differential operator of degree 0. That's the main observation, and you can apply. So now you apply the Leray projector to the equation, and you find this equation without the pressure. So U dot plus pi omega wedge U pi equal pi f of t. Okay, and so it's like say a Schrödinger equation or something like that, because this operator is anti-self-adjoint, and moreover, it's still a pseudo-differential operator of degree 0 because each pi is and omega wedge U is simply a linear operator of degree 0. Okay, so you have this model where you have U dot plus a pseudo-differential operator of degree 0 equal the forcing. And now, in principle, it's a matrix equation. Okay, but in order to simplify, we will look only at a scalar equation. That will be our model. So our model is like that. We will remove the boundaries and reduce to a scalar. But already with this model, which I will present just after, we can give a description of what is the attractor. So it's here. So we start the usual business. Okay, we start with a closed compact without boundary manifold with a density dx of dimension d, and we consider on the manifold a classical self-adjoint pseudo-differential operator h of degree 0. We have almost nothing to say to know about pseudo-differential operator, just the fact that there is a principal symbol and the fact that the commutators are given by the Poisson bracket, something like that. It's almost nothing. Okay, and so there is a principal symbol, which is a function defined on the cotangent bundle minus the zero section with value in the real numbers, and which is homogeneous of degree 0, because the operator is of degree 0. So this operator H, which will play the role of the Schrödinger operator, is bounded, because it is of degree 0, is bounded on L2. And from general facts, we know that the spectrum is the set of values of the symbol, which is an interval, because H is a continuous function homogeneous of degree 0. So you have some interval E, and that gives the essential spectrum, and maybe you have some eigenvalues, discrete spectrum outside the interval. But we will not be concerned with the eigen. Typical example is this one. You choose some differential operator of degree 2, and you look at this operator, P, Laplace minus Laplace inverse plus Laplace inverse P adjoint. Is clearly of degree 0, pseudo-differential, and self-adjoint. Okay, so there are many of them. And we look at this kind of equation, which is a very simplified version of what we saw before about the inertial of our internal waves. So 1 over E, U dot, plus HU, well, the forcing, which is F is a smooth function, and omega is a real number, which is a frequency. Of course, the behavior of the solution will depend on the frequency, on the function, and everything. And what we want to know is what is the asymptotic behavior of the solution as the time goes to infinity. And we expect to see some emergence of what we will call, and of course, because it's a spectral geometry seminar, and because what will follow after, the problem is linked to the spectral theory of the operator H near the frequency omega. In fact, we have this explicit solution in terms of the functional calculus of H. So you see there is A minus X minus T H and H. We will assume sometimes that omega is 0. And so it's a problem. Certainly, all of you know already that problem is some simple case. If omega is not in the spectrum of our Hamiltonian, then U of t is bounded in L2. Okay? If omega is an isolated eigenvalue, that's usually linear growth of the L2 norm in time. So the solution is going to infinity in L2 linearly. But what is probably less well known is what happens if omega belongs to the essential spectrum. That will be the case. And I will give an answer if the spectrum is absolutely continuous near omega. Our goal in what follows is to describe the properties of the Hamiltonian dynamics of the principal symbol on the cone. So it's the cone is the energy shell, if you want. You fix omega and you look at H minus omega. So you fix H equal omega because H is homogeneous of degree 0. Sigma omega is a subcode of the cotangent bundle. And there is some, if you look at the Hamiltonian dynamics of the principal symbol, it is from general facts tangent to the cone, and there is some dynamics, but the cone now is not bounded. If you are in case of elliptic operator, you will do the same. You have the energy shell, which is the unit cotangent bundle of your Riemannian manifold, if you want, and it's bounded. Here you have some dynamics, which is on some non-bounded manifold, but there is still some structure It's not arbitrary dynamics. And in order to describe the way, my goal now is to describe the way the dynamics is going to infinity. And because the attractors will correspond to what happens when the classical dynamics goes to infinity. And for that, we introduce what is called in this business an escape function. An escape function is a function on the cotangent bundle, which is homogeneous of degree 1. And we fix the frequency. Now, if we look at the Poisson bracket, HK, H is homogeneous of degree 0, K is homogeneous of degree 1, so the Poisson bracket is homogeneous of degree 0. So it makes sense to assume that it's bounded below away of 0 on this energy shell. Okay, it means that the derivative of the escape function with respect to the Hamiltonian dynamics is bounded below by a strictly positive constant. So K is a kind of Lyapunov function at infinity. If phi t is a Hamiltonian flow, the classical dynamics, we have K of phi t of z goes to plus infinity as t goes to plus infinity and minus infinity in the other direction. Note also that K remains an escape function for omega m, omega prime close to omega. We follow the usual path in microlocal analysis. It's just to look what happens on the classical level, and then the result we want will follow from what happens in the classical level. We fixed omega equals 0. We can change h into h minus omega. So we can fix omega equals 0. And the cone is h equals 0. And we introduce the set of lines in the cone. So Z is the quotient of this cone by the positive dilations. So it's a compact manifold, which we interpret as a kind of compactification or boundary at infinity of the cone. Okay, just the direction of the cone. Okay. We assume that the differential of H doesn't vanish on the cone. Then Z is a closed manifold of dimension 2D minus 2, because there is you remove one dimension when taking the cone, and you take the quotient by the dilation. So if the dimension is 2, you get a 2D manifold. If the dimension is 3, you get a 4D manifold. And all the dynamics can be understood in this manifold. What we do, we look at the Hamiltonian vector fields, H. This dynamics is homogeneous of degree -1. Okay. Then, if you take the quotient, it's by the dilation, the dynamics is not well defined, but it's defined up to multiplication. Okay. So on Z, you have a foliation. By a foliation, I mean a vector field up to conformal change, up to multiplication by a smooth function. Okay, you have really a foliation. So the dynamics is really interpreted or arised by an oriented foliation on a 2D minus 2 manifold. Okay, and now what will be the main first result on the dynamical properties is that we can be sure of the existence of an escape function if you have the following properties. There are 4 properties. Essentially, the dynamics, there is some attracting part, which is gamma plus, some repulsing part, which is gamma minus. Both are invariant by the dynamic, the foliation, and omega is a set of wandering of points. So gamma plus is an attractor for the foliation. The foliation is oriented, And the basin of gamma plus is gamma plus union omega, and gamma minus is an attractor for F with a reversed orientation. So you have this, okay. And you ask a weak hyperbolicity means that near gamma plus, you can generate the foliation by a vector field with strictly negative divergence with respect to osmose density. It's not important which density you take, there is no canonical, but it's kind of weak divergence, weak hyperbolicity property. You are just looking at the divergence and not at all Lyapunov exponent, etc. And similarly for F bar. And now, if you have that, if Z0 belongs to the cone generated by gamma plus and omega, the Hamiltonian trajectory of Z0, which converge to infinity to gamma plus. So if you have this gamma plus, it's also an attractor from the inside of the dynamics, not only for the foliation. So that way you see that really this foliation is controlling entirely the dynamics. Okay, I will describe the main result. We assume only the existence of this escape function, and also a kind of generic property is that 0 is not an L2 eigenvalue. 0 is now the frequency of the force. Then we have the decomposition. U of t is U infinity, a remainder R of t, plus another remainder epsilon of t. So U infinity is a Schwarz distribution, is not in L2 in general. Okay, just a Schwarz distribution. R of t is bounded in L2, really separation, and epsilon of t tends to 0 as a distribution. So if you separate, you have a contribution which is a distribution, U infinity plus epsilon of t, which is converging as t goes to infinity to the distribution U infinity, and there is a bounded remainder. You can understand this R of t because you can have some other part of the spectrum. So you cannot avoid this R of t. Okay. And what is the length of this distribution? We say nothing about R of t, but the main point is about this distribution. And you know that the result is that the wavefront set, I mean the wavefront set I will discuss about, it's a subset of the cotangent space, the subcone of the cotangent space, whose projection is a singular support of the distribution, okay? But which take into account the Fourier transform. It was introduced in the 70s by Hermander. And the wavefront set, I mean the singular part of that distribution, is a subset of the cone generated by the attractor of the foliation. So you have this foliation at infinity. It's related to a cone, okay, because the infinity corresponds to the lines of the cone. So the wavefront set is, and so it means that you see the behavior of U of t is more and more singular, but yeah, you get a limit, okay, except up to bounded function. You get a limit. So it's in sharp contrast with the case where you have a discrete spectrum where 0 is a discrete eigenvalue, where you have no limit. The U of t is going to infinity in L2. Here you have a limit, but not in L2. In some negative subwave space you can describe, but it's not very important. And so that's exactly the meaning of this attractor. The attractor is exactly the part where the solution becomes more and more singular. Okay, that's our interpretation of the attractor. And if you look at the L2 norm, you have not a linear, but it's proportional to square root of t. So U infinity is not in L2, but it's a limit of some function was L2 norm is going to infinity. That's the main reason. And this decomposition is unique if you do something, if you assume that the time Fourier transform of R of t is away of the frequency. Okay, you assume that the time Fourier transform of R vanishes near zero. So this contribution R of t correspond to the part of the spectrum which is far away of the forcing frequency. So it means that if you make a Fourier transform with respect to time, you can, and you make you multiply by a smooth function, or you make a truncation near zero, you can this part will disappear. If you make just a Fourier transform with respect to time, you can remove this part. Okay, you multiply by some test function which is supported near the origin in time. Okay, and you take the Fourier transform and you can remove this term. So this decomposition is really unique if you do that. And I say again, the attractor is just the projection onto our manifold of the wavefront set, which is contained in the attractor of the foliation. Okay, so the result is very simple. In fact, it's just as you will see, the proof is not very difficult. But okay, so I will just an example. So in 2D, so if X is two-dimensional, then my manifold at infinity, my manifold Z, is also two-dimensional. Okay, and there is a well-studied class of foliation which is called Morse-Mel foliation. Okay, what is a Morse-Mel foliation? The non-wandering set is the union of a finite number of closed hyperbolic trajectories and of singular hyperbolic points. So every the invariant sets are closed orbit, which are transversally hyperbolic, and singular points, which can be attractors or sources or saddle point, but they are all hyperbolic. And there is another property which is also important. There is no saddle connection. I mean, there is no leaf which is together a stable leaf of a saddle point and an unstable leaf of another point. There are no leaves connecting two saddle points. And this property is known to be generic property for foliations. And we assume this corresponds to this weak hyperbolicity property, which I was describing. You have only to assume that near the saddle points, the trace of the linearist vector field generating the foliation do not vanish. So it means that one of the two exponent, Lyapunov exponent, in absolute value is larger than the other. Okay. This condition is also generic. Okay. We call the stable point, the saddle point, weakly stable if the trace is strictly negative and unstable in the other case. Okay. And in this case, it works. It means that you have an escape function. And what is gamma plus? You take all attracting cycles, you take all attracting singular points, and you look at all saddle points which are weakly stable, and you add also their unstable leaves. Okay, I make a picture. Here you have an hyperbolic singular point. Here you have an hyperbolic closed leaf, and here you have a saddle point which is weakly stable with a stable manifold and the unstable manifold. So you add the unstable manifold here and the unstable which is spiraling around. Okay. And the attractor will be a subset of this blue curve. Okay. So I guess I will skip part because it's too long, but okay. There is the case we were studying first with Laure was the case of a torus with a non-singular foliation and a Poincaré section. So in this case, you have a Poincaré map from this circle, you follow a leaf and you go back. And you can describe all properties as coming of this map, which is now a circle diffeomorphism. And you can use what is known about a rotation number. So it's like that. So you have a circle diffeo. And usually the rotation number is like that. So there is some part where it's locally constant, which correspond to the rotation number is rational. And you have periodic points, which typically are hyperbolic. So this corresponds to our absolutely continuous spectrum, to what we say correspond to this part of the spectrum, this horizontal part of the spectrum. And of course, the spectrum has also more complicated parts, which are we are not able to describe in general. So it's like you have the complement of a Cantor set, if you want. Okay. And the complement of the Cantor set is a union of open intervals on which typically the spectrum is absolutely continuous. You can do what I was presenting. But on the Cantor set, I don't know what is exactly the spectrum. It's for future works. I will just have a few minutes in order to describe the proof. So it's a three-part proof. So the first part is just an abstract theory for the linear forcing in case of a continuous spectrum. If omega is not in the spectrum, as I say, U of t is bounded. So you can assume that the spectral decomposition of F lives in some small interval around omega, and the rest will be in the bounded remainder R of t. And then you have this, which is nothing if omega is isolated. But if we have an absolutely continuous spectrum, so it means that the resolvent have a boundary value when you go to the real part. And you assume that the boundary value is smooth with respect to omega. So you have this H minus omega minus E0, which is the limit of H minus omega minus E epsilon, is epsilon positive, which is the resolvent. And you assume that there exists a limit. Then this U infinity is exactly the limit. And even if F is in L2, this U infinity is not in general in L2. Okay, and you can see and prove it's not difficult. It's just a simple exercise using the spectral decomposition that U de t converges to this infinity modulo L2 bounded function, and you have this estimate. Once you know this statement, you can do it yourself. It's a very simple exercise. You start from the spectral decomposition of F, and you get everything. So it's a kind of abstract version of what we want. And now, how do we prove that an operator has an absolutely continuous spectrum? There is a very nice way to do that, which is called Moore theory. So it's due to Eric Moore. It says that if we have a bounded self-adjoint operator on some hyperspace, and if you have another self-adjoint operator unbounded, we can define the bracket with a I. So this operator K at H is anti-self-adjoint, or B at is self-adjoint. Okay, and we assume, or Moore assumes, that you can make a truncation of your operator H near in some interval E, okay, which will be around omega. Chi of H, B at chi of H is larger than C chi of H modulo a compact operator, and C is strictly positive. So the assumption is local. It's exactly what we want. We want to have a local assumption near our forcing frequency. Okay, if you assume only that, the operator has maybe some discrete spectrum, but a finite set, and the resolvent, defined for imaginary part non-zero, admits boundary values outside the discrete spectrum, and the boundary values C1 to with value of an operator which are from some subole space in positive to some negative subole space. It means that if you apply this operator to a smooth function, you get a distribution which is in a negative subole space, but not too much negative. It's just minus 1/2 minus epsilon. Okay, that's exactly what we want. Okay, and now how do we apply Moore theory? Here you have a bracket, and a bracket is something very easy to control in the context of pseudo-differential operators, because you know that the principal symbol of a bracket of two pseudo-differential operators is given by the Poisson bracket. So it means that I missed something. You apply Gordon inégalité to a quantization of the escape function. So you take for this K a pseudo-differential operator for which the principal symbol is the escape function, and you get exactly this kind of inequality by taking a test function which with a support which is small enough. Okay, so it gives just by Gordon inequality. Gordon inequality says that if the symbol is positive, the operator is positive modulo compact operator. So it's exactly what we want. Okay. So this gives the existence of U infinity, but now we have to describe where are the singularities of U infinity. And again, there is another result by Eric Moore, which says that if pi minus is a spectral projector onto the negative part of the spectrum of the this operator Ka, then pi minus of the resolvent applied to some source function is in L2. It means that from the microlocal point of view, U infinity is in L2 near gamma moins, near the cone generated by gamma moins. Okay. You can use a result by Hermander or de Westermaat and Hermander about the propagation of L2 singularities, which says that then U infinity is still locally L2 outside the attractor. The only singularities of U infinity are in the projection of gamma. It's possible to do better. We did it in a very elementary way with Laure Saint-Raymond, but it comes from a general result, which is quite technical, which is the fact that if some function satisfies some regularities, then you can improve that regularities under some dynamical assumptions. So it's the basic reference is in the book on resonances by Dyatlov and Zworsky, and that what Dyatlov and Zworsky were using in their paper. In fact, Zworsky is wanted to avoid the use of Moore theory. Okay. And he succeeded, but I find that the proof is, for me, it's quite difficult. And moreover, they are not able to recover the Morse-Mel case with singular points. They recover only the case of a non-singular foliation of the terms. And then you have, in this case, you have H minus I0, you have U infinity from this result. U infinity is smooth near gamma minus, and by propagation of singularity is smooth outside gamma plus. Okay. So it's not very complicated. It's a combination of an abstract result, which say what happens with a periodic forcing in presence of absolutely continuous spectrum, and the fact that you have this Moore theory of commutator theory, which implies that we can prove the absolute continuity of the spectrum just by the microlocal machinery, the commutator of two pseudo-differential operators, and the existence of this escape function. It's very well. This last part is more complicated. In our paper, we did it using a normal form near the hyperbolic leaves, and it works. But so there are two papers. In my paper, I used this. I was not able to avoid this use of quite technical microlocal object. Okay. Now, there are a lot of perspectives. Case with boundary, which is closer of the experiments. There is a recent work by Dyatlov, Wang, and Zworsky in 2D with a smooth generic boundary. There's kind of convexity assumption. They are not able in this paper to extend to the case of polygonal domains, which are even closer to the experiments. Okay, I don't know if it's possible. What is how looks the spectrum in this counter set? I mean, in the complement of the absolutely continuous spectrum. No idea. Is it a pure point spectrum, a singular continuous spectrum? It's part of the spectrum. Okay, but another problem is to add the viscosity. So you have the viscosity, which can be very small, the time which goes to infinity. And we computed with Slor a very simple example. And we say that in this example, if the time is say smaller than nu to the -1/3, then you don't see the viscosity. It's close to the non-viscous solution. But if the time is larger than this negative power of the viscosity, then you have the solution stabilized to some energy. So the energy is bounded. It's a very easy fact. If you have some non-zero viscosity, you have the solution stay bounded in L2, but the bounds depend on the viscosity. So you have a curve for the energy. The energy is growing as a square root of time up to some time, and after it's stabilized to some plateau, which is larger and larger if nu is smaller and smaller. And there is also a problem. We take the linearized Navier-Stokes equation, but what about the nonlinear effects? Okay. So we wrote two papers. The one with Laure Saint-Raymond, which is appear in CPRM, and the other one. In fact, Laure doesn't want to be an associated author because she said he was not understanding enough of pseudo-differential machinery, so she retracted, but it's still a collaboration with Laure. Okay. And there is a related work of Dyatlov, Zworsky, and there is also a work of Galkovsky, Zworsky on resonances, which is another aspect of small viscosity. So they look at what is the limit of the spectrum when the spectrum with viscosity, when the viscosity is going to zero, and you get what is called resonances. Okay, so it's very nice result too. Okay, I guess I will stop here. Thank you for your attention. I hope it was not too difficult to follow.
Thank you very much, Yves. We can thank the speaker. So we have time for a few questions. You do have to leave at 7, right? You said.
Yeah, but it's not. I can.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
We have time.
Okay, good. So if there's any question, as usual, you can put them in the chat if you can't speak or say them out loud. Oh, Semyon.
Thank you very much for the very nice talk.
Salut.
I have a question just to clarify. So one of the assumptions in the theorem is about absence of embedded spectrum. Is it possible to actually verify for a given operator whether this assumption holds?
No, I don't know. But there is some paper of students of you or of Dvorsky. I don't know. There is something. No?
At some point there was mention of a Fermi golden rule, but I was. I mean, in some explicit examples we can check, but for general operator, on our end, it seemed that we don't really know in this general setting.
No, what will be nice is just to prove that a generic situation or something like that. But even that, it's not so, I don't know. Hopefully, it's a generic situation. But even if you can still describe the behavior. You have a part which is going linearly, you can separate different parts of the spectrum. No, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Is there any other question? In the paper you mentioned towards the end where they have a smooth boundary, there's a genericity assumption. Do you know a bit what it is? What forces you to have genericity?
I have a look on this paper. It works, for example, if the boundary is strictly convex. But in fact, once you fix omega, it's a weaker assumption. So there are two assumptions. One assumption, it's a kind of strict convexity of the domain, and the other assumption is assumption on the foliation. In fact, in this case, you have a Poincaré map, which is from the boundary to the boundary. Okay. And then you assume that the rotation number of that diffeomorphism of the circle is rational with hyperbolic periodic points and things like that. But there is first an assumption, a kind of convexity assumption, which imply that the Poincaré map defined from the boundary is smooth. Otherwise, if you have some angles or things like that, then the boundary is the Poincaré map is not smooth. But you can ask Semyon because he's here.
So I can say that yes, maybe later I'm scheduled to give a talk in the same seminar. Now I'm inspired that I might actually talk about our work with Dvorsky, and then I'll have plenty of time to talk about it then. But briefly, our assumption, you don't need strict convexity. It's a kind of assumption simplicity with respect to some lines. But a basic example when it applies, if you take a trapezoid of the kind that the physicists, when they studied those internal waves, took, and then you just round the corners slightly to get rid of the corners. So we do not handle, as was correctly pointed out by Professor Colin-Tivetier, we do not handle corners.
Okay.
But other than that, it does seem to correspond to the domains and the equations that we could find in the physics literature. Yeah, like this one. Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much. That's right. You take one of those and you just round corners to make them see infinity, and then we can say something.
Did you try to look at corners to do something with corners?
We thought we originally were hoping to do it. Well, we're thinking corners would be easier, but it turned out not to be the case.
No.
And maybe eventually somebody will look at it, but so far we haven't. Our unsubstantiated guess is that maybe there is a singularity that goes from the corner and it could even propagate, but it might be too weak to be picked up, not only by experiments, but it might be in the energy space. That being said, we do not have any actual research to support that claim.
Do you know?
But certainly a very interesting question.
Do you know if somebody did a pseudo-differential calculus on surfaces with?
Well, people studied the wave propagation was studied extensively in the Melrose School. Well, right, it's going back to Chigro-Gromel. I mean, you do not expect C infinity to be the right answer up to the boundary in corners for elliptic problems. So that's kind of the beginning of where it gets more complicated.
Yeah.
So we don't think that C infinity up to the boundary for a generic angle would be the right space, but we don't really know what the right space in this kind of elliptic degenerating to hyperbolic problem really is.
Did anyone else have another question? Well, then I think we can thank the speaker again.
Merci, merci.
And we meet. Oh, sorry about that. I did not do my job of remembering who's speaking next week. Well, maybe if Jean, you manage to...
We're having Doreen Bucher next week. We'll talk about maximization of Neumann eigenvalues.
See you all next week.